One story you won't see on any of the front pages, apart from the local newspapers, is the big press conference yesterday about the Manchester grooming gangs, and a launch of a report yesterday into what went wrong back in 2004 when detectives on the Greater Manchester Police launched Operation Augusta after the death of a 15-year-old girl called Victoria, who had told her carers before her death that she was being regularly raped and injected with heroin by an Asian man. Now, the probe was shelved just a year later, despite the fact that the force uncovered vast amounts of evidence of an ongoing sex grooming gang involving almost 100 paedophiles in Manchester, who later went on to rape and abuse dozens and dozens of young girls in the area. This was just in 2004. It wasn't decades ago. It wasn't a different time. And it's still happening now. We're seeing ongoing cases with grooming gangs across the country, whether it's Rochdale, Rotherham, Telford, Dewsbury, everywhere around the country. Those cases are now finally hitting the courts. But one of the people who has made sure that has happened is my next guest. Maggie Oliver is a former Greater Manchester Police detective, and she is the whistleblower for a huge number of these cases. And she was there at that press conference yesterday. Good morning to you, Maggie.
Good morning,
It is such a pleasure and an honour to meet you because of the work you've done. A lot of people perhaps would have first heard about you or seen you, image portrayed of you in that BBC drama Three Girls, which I think for a lot of people brought home what was actually going on in terms of these grooming gangs. Now, a lot of this has been politicised, and we're going to talk a lot about the origins of the men involved in the grooming gangs and the children and things like that. But yesterday was yet another report into yet another space of grooming going on by yet another gang in another city, where everyone, it would appear, in a position of authority, whether it was the police, social care, the local council, the care homes, they were all aware of what was going on. And they chose to do nothing about it. Can you explain to me and to people listening how on earth that happens in this country?
Julia, I can't even explain it to myself. You know, I've spent 15 years of my life fighting for the truth about this case from 15 years ago to be made public. So yesterday was a monumental day for me personally. It was a vindication of everything I have been saying. But I'm like a broken record. I keep saying the same thing. And I hear the same apologies trotted out.
And we saw yesterday, didn't we? We said the chief of Metropolitan Police, how appalled he was. He wasn't there at the time. We had the Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester mayor. And this happens every time there's a new report. We're horrified. We're so sorry. It won't happen again.
Yeah. And actually what they say then is, this was 15 years ago. Things have changed. Well, I'm telling you, they have not. I have now set up my own foundation because I am inundated on a daily basis with stories and desperate letters and messages from people who are suffering right now.
And this is the key thing. So what happened in this case? A girl died. And it's only when there's a death when, we're all going to have to sit up and pay notice, the authorities think. And she had already told her carers that she was basically being groomed by a man in the area and who was injecting her with heroin and regularly raping her. And they, despite the fact that, and you were part of this investigation, weren't you? It wasn't like, we can't identify this man. We've got no idea who the other victims are. We've got no one to give a witness statement. We're going to have to close the case. Quite the opposite.
Yeah, I have to make clear that Victoria's death was not part of Operation Augusta.
Yes.
But I actually wrote the Operation Augusta report in 2004. And the reason that we put the photograph of Victoria at the front of that was because she had just died.
Yeah.
And she had been groomed. I didn't know grooming existed back then. It was my first introduction to this horrific crime.
Because often the people in authority were referring to these girls as well, they were just
prostitutes,
and they were using some pretty pejorative terms about which I probably can't say on the radio at this time. Most of them beginning with SNL. But yeah, and these were their older boyfriends. These were 13-year-old girls with boyfriends in their 40s.
Yeah, and what has always shocked me is why there was only me shouting out about it.
Do you think it's because you're a woman? Do you think you felt it more? Because if my husband had been a detective, he'd have looked at it and gone, this is wrong.
Absolutely. And you know what? The powers that be have tried to shut me down from day one. And the language that they have used to do that is that I am a woman who became too emotionally involved, that I'd lost the plot, that I was bereaved, misogynistic ideas and words intended to shoot the messenger, when those chief constables knew full well that I was telling the truth. Yeah. This report makes it very clear that we haven't had any more new evidence. The evidence was there in 2005.
And yet nothing was done.
And Operation Green Jacket has now been opened with the same evidence that we had back then. And I'll tell you that GMP have spent a full year battling to prevent this being published. Phase 2 is looking at the Rochdale case that I resigned over, and Rochdale Social Services are refusing to hand over any information in relation to that case. So the cover-up and the secrecy continues. And the question I have for every listener is, what is the real cost of all those lies? 15 years of lies. It's too late for these kids. Yeah. But what we need is accountability. We need criminal convictions of senior police officers who will be charged, in my opinion, with misconduct in a public office.
Because this isn't someone not sure. This isn't someone who wasn't aware of it. It's not negligence. They made conscious decision to close down, in a number of cases, investigations, or to not deliberately not start investigations so that they didn't have to prosecute. Okay, well, this is when we get to the crux of the matter, and this is where it's become very difficult politically to talk about it, and not just partly because in a lot of these cases also it's a party political issue, and it's been let's be honest, it's Labour councils, and there has been a particular issue. Now, do I think the Labour Party's got a bigger problem with this than the Tory Party? No, I don't. But there's clearly been a particular issue in these councils, and the key issue there has been, the accusation has been that we were constantly told, Asian grooming gangs. They are almost to a man Pakistani Muslim gang. They're not any other Asian.
They're not Japanese or Chinese.
They're Pakistani Muslim. They're coming from a particular culture, a particular background. And the claim that is being made is that they were able to continue their grooming of girls, white girls in the community. They viewed the white girls as disposable, as prostitutes. They didn't have any value to them, and it would appear that the investigations didn't go forward by the police, social care, the council, because there was concern about being seen to be racist or Islamophobic. Do you think that played a role? That it was because of their ethnicity and their religion that they weren't prosecuted?
I do think that was a big part of it. But, I mean, the report itself says that, it was very clear that we had evidence to prosecute these men. And I think political correctness was part of it. I also feel that these kids were viewed as an underclass, that they didn't matter. They weren't the chief constable's children. They were the children of families who were often from very difficult backgrounds.
Most of these children were in care, weren't they?
On Operation Augusta, yes, they were, Julia, but on Operation Span, no, they weren't.
But that's Rochdale.
And that's Rochdale. Yeah. Well, they both were actually... Yeah, Victoria was Rochdale. Yeah. But, the Rochdale case of 2012... which, repeated the failures. And I could take the report that I wrote about Operation Augusta, I could put it on top of the case in Rochdale in 2012, and it is identical.
And it's still happening now?
It is still happening now, which is why I've opened my foundation. Yeah. Because there is isolation is a big part of this, victim blaming, ignoring the facts. And one person going to the police who doesn't receive the right attitude or even the right individual officer is often frightened away. We need somewhere for them all to go where they are supported and
presumably
believed.
Also where you can spot patterns as well. But again, what we saw in the Three Girls drama, and it was a very accurate representation of what had happened. The Betrayed Girls was the docudrama document about it. But again and again, it's this ability to people to turn their heads away when we're seeing in care homes. We're seeing girls who are being picked. The guy, the boyfriend in inverted commas, turns up in his flash car or even just in his van or whatever, toots the horn. The girl has to leave the care home. The care home staff are not legally allowed to stop the girls from leaving.
No, that's true.
They're getting into a car with a 40-year-old man. They're being plied with booze and fags. We've seen a lot over the takeaway. So we'll give you the kebab and the pizza. Come upstairs, and then and then things happen. They're plied with drugs. We've seen young teenage girls repeatedly turning up back at their homes or their care homes, having been beaten up, clearly having been the victim of sexual abuse. Girls turning up repeatedly for abortions at the local NHS hospital, and the view seemed to have been they're cheap, they're selling themselves, they don't matter. given that these people were in a position where they were legally required to care and to take action, you're saying that's why they need to face criminal conviction.
100%.
They did know what they were doing.
They knew full well. This was not a mistake. This was a deliberate action to bury a job where we had multiple paedophiles, dozens and dozens and dozens of kids. That is their duty. As a police officer, you promise to uphold the law. You record allegations of rape. There is a girl who was she was actually Ruby on the representing the drama. I'm talking about Rochdale in 2012 and 13, not 15 years ago. She was made pregnant by a man. That man was not prosecuted for rape. We had a fetus. What more do they want? And I will tell you something.
When legally speaking, she's under 16.
She was 12, 13 when she got pregnant. But you know what? That girl met that abuser in Asda in Rochdale about a month ago. She came face to face to him round the aisle, and he had kept sole custody of a child. Now, the issues here, this report is a review. There is no legal necessity for anybody to do anything. If the Chief Constable, who yesterday said he apologised, knew that if he made a decision today burying another job, that in 15 years' time he could lose his pension and he could go to prison, I can guarantee you that he would make different decisions today. And that's what we need.
This isn't about scapegoating. This is about requiring people. We're trusting that they do their job. And yet, and the fact that a lot of this is happening in plain sight. And again, this wasn't happening 100 years ago.
No.
This wasn't happening. We had so many scandals coming out about, the Catholic Church or about Jimmy Savile, things happening, decades ago. This is here and now.
Yeah, but it's a national issue, and it isn't just GMP, even though
Greater Manchester Police.
Yeah, it isn't just Greater Manchester Police. This is a national problem, and when you look at the whole of the criminal justice system, legal aid has fallen apart. We have High Court judges criticising what is being done. We also have the CPS failing to prosecute the vast majority of rapes. Only the easiest of rapes are now prosecuted. And that is acknowledged by the CPS. The DPP, the number of rapes in her watch, the Alison Saunders, who has just been knighted, it's virtually impossible to get a rape charge unless it's very easy. These cases are really difficult to prosecute.
And again, a lot of the girls often, they'll say they're not credible victims because they're drug addicts. But you would be if you've been raped repeatedly since the age of 12. I mean, this is the thing. And we know often we've had the parents have gone to the authorities and said, please help my child. These aren't kids that have been, abandoned a lot of the time. And also, we just find it, we are short of time, but in terms of how these kids get drawn into this, they don't sort of just waltz off and just sell themselves. I mean, that's not what's happening. They're
being targeted.
They're being targeted and they're groomed. And these guys are really, sometimes, these are the first people who've been nice to these girls for 10 years.
Yeah, but they are targeted because the men know they can get away with it. Yeah. The issues, Julia, are the big issues: resourcing, commitment, accountability, valuing the children, speaking the truth, not lying, not trying to cover up. And those issues can be repeated in every town and city throughout the country. We have to, as a country, to get a grip of this. And it makes me angry. It makes me horrified. It almost destroyed my life. But these kids have had their lives destroyed. Let's not let another generation have their lives destroyed.
Absolutely. Maggie, I genuinely, I'm so honoured to meet you. I think the work you've done has been so brave, and you've taken a lot of hits on your personal reputation. You lost your career, but what you've done, she set up the Maggie Oliver Foundation. It's the MaggieOliverFoundation.com. You can find it at maggieoliver.co.uk. Just Google them, and if you've been affected by this or you want to help, get in touch. It's a fantastic work. And again, these forgotten girls, you know what, they're not forgotten anymore, and we have got to fight. And I'm with you all the way.
Thank you.
People, heads have got to roll. People have got to be prosecuted, because this is going to continue to happen. And our 12, 13 and 14-year-old girls across the country are not fair game.
No, they're not.
To anyone. I couldn't care less where someone's
I don't. The law is the law.
Is.
A rapist is a rapist, and we prosecute them.